Hi, I'm Maisie. So here's a fun story. Let's talk about Celestial Seasonings. Celestial Seasonings is one of the top 10 tea manufacturers in the United States. They're most popular for their famous tea, Sleepy Time Tea. If you haven't heard of Celestial Seasonings, you've heard of Sleepy Time Tea. You can find their products all over the shelves in most grocery stores. They have a pretty wide variety. You think you know where I'm going, but you don't. See, the founders of Celestial Seasonings were really inspired by this obscure religious text known as the Urantia book. It was written by aliens and totally not a group of randos in Chicago in the early part of the last century. Ignoring all of that for a moment, we can actually use the Urantia book and its story as a good introduction for copyright law, just the bare minimum. To put it in simple terms, copyright refers to the legal rights of an intellectual property owner. It's in the name. Copyright, the right to make copies. Now, this principle isn't exactly clear when it comes to religious texts in the United States. The owners of the copyright of the Urantia, surprisingly known as the Urantia Foundation, ran into this very issue in the 90s. A woman named Kristen Mahara was sued by the Urantia Foundation for reproducing parts of the Urantia. For what reason she did this, I have no idea, but in the end it was decided that otherworldly and omnipotent beings were not intended to be protected by copyright law. Big shocker there. The only people who had any sort of legal claim were the conduits of the aliens who wrote it, or the people who actually wrote it, and their heirs. Since there were no heirs to claim it, it's public domain, you can still use it today. Sidebar. Public domain works are creative materials that anyone can use. No one owns the public domain. Works often enter the public domain by either the intention of the author, the copyright expiring, or a slew of other reasons. A fairly recent example of a work entering the public domain would be F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. There's like 1 million adaptations now. It's crazy, but it's completely within legal bounds. Sidebar over. 4 years after the Urantia Foundation versus Mahara, a book titled Jesus, A New Revelation quoted 70 pages of the Urantia verbatim. Again, no idea why. If the Urantia was a copyrighted book, this would not be considered fair use. However, since it was public domain, it was completely within legal bounds. Another sidebar. Fair use is a doctrine in the United States that allows for copyrighted material to be used in limited capacity without the permission of the copyright owner. This covers everything from news reporting to criticism to parody to transformation and a whole other bunch of things. If the share of the market that the original copyright protects isn't being infringed on, it's fair use. It's more flexible than a lot of people give it credit, and according to 2015's Lens vs. Universal Music Corporation, hilariously known as the Dancing Baby case. Okay. Fair use isn't just a legal defense, but it's an expressed legal right. You see abuses of fair use all the time, like that one woman from TikTok who ripped off a Melanie Martinez song completely, but these are usually matters that are resolved fairly quickly. Also, while we're here, there is a pending court case, Dr. Seuss versus Comic Mix, that could potentially change the definition of fair use. While I personally don't think that the Dr. Seuss people have a leg to stand on, as a Star Trek themed graphic novel using Seussian language and art style is transformative completely of its own, I would regret not putting this in the video in case for some reason the Dr. Seuss Foundation does prevail. Sidebar over. Today, Celestial Seasonings is a multi-billion-dollar company. Most of its founders are long since dead or unaffiliated with the company, but it seems that the Urantia book still has some sort of hold over the company. Hopefully by now, you understand some of the basics of copyright law, and if you do, you know more than most. We'll get into that later though, putting a pin in it. With our knowledge of how copyright works now, little as it may be, I think it's time to look at how this translates online. The way copyright is enforced online is a little different than how it's enforced in real life, thanks to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. Already, you should have alarm bells ringing off in your head. A law from the late 90s specifically concerning copyright law and how that translates online has not even a sliver of hope of understanding the scope of the internet and how we use it today. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, known more commonly as the DMCA, was written in the early days of online activity to decide how copyright infringement would function in digital spaces. There was a lot of back and forth, but eventually a moderately happy medium was reached. Section 512 of the DMCA removes the burden of liability of copyright infringement from online platforms like YouTube or Facebook. On these platforms, users are free to post whatever they want. If platforms were legally liable for the content their users posted, the feature wouldn't be there. In order to stay unaccountable for any copyright infringement taking place on their sites, platforms have to honor something called DMCA takedown notices. A DMCA takedown notice is something issued from a copyright holder to a platform that says, hey, this is my work, I didn't give permission, this is a violation of copyright laws, please remove this or I'll be suing you. And platforms have to legally abide by that. If a user receives a DMCA takedown notice and believes it to be either made in bad faith or mistaken, they can issue what's called a DMCA counter notice. This counter notice has the possibility of reinstating the deleted content if it's found to be fair use or not related to the copyright holder whatsoever. As I'm sure you can see already, this system can and often does lead to a long and arduous legal battle between individuals and copyright holders. YouTube is famous at this point for taking down copyrighted content the moment they detect it with its automated system. We aren't yet at a point where machines are able to comprehend the nuances that humans can, so this is an issue in and of itself. Giant media conglomerates often do the same. This leads to many videos being blocked in certain countries or even removed entirely. Sometimes this can be seen as sending a message of sorts. Some users, like Onision, they issue notices even if you mention their name in a video and they don't like it. In all these cases, whether or not copyright was actually infringed becomes irrelevant. These are what's known as bad faith DMCA notices. This is an offense punishable under perjury, so it's kind of crazy to me that people would just hand them out like lollipops. However, the issuers of these bad faith notices are often much wealthier or of higher statuses than the individuals they're targeting. This makes the pursuit of justice in the court system almost impossible for most people. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act is, in a word, dated. Because of that, it's frequently abused by media conglomerates, networks, and wealthy individuals. If a DMCA takedown notice is issued on a bad faith basis, the issuer is subject to be punished under perjury. However, since this course of action is rarely pursued and hard to definitively prove, those who make bad faith claims often go unpunished for their actions. This is a major part of our legal system that needs changing. Online, copyright is easily and often infringed. I'm sure you see it every day. It's what the modern internet landscape was made for, the quick dissemination of knowledge. In her 2019 work, Weaponizing Copyright, Cultural Governance and Regulating Speech in the Knowledge Economy, Deborah Halpert talks about this very phenomenon. In highlighting how cultural governance works through copyright, it is important to note that while predominantly about securing a stable commercial enterprise for the culture industry, copyright can also function, and has functioned, to curb the speech of others, along normative lines of social life. We can argue about if copyright as censorship is good or bad, but first we have to acknowledge that it's happening. Through bad faith DMCA takedown requests, copyright holders are able to decide what is and isn't allowed to be accessible by the public. While individual copyright holders may wield this power, a scarier, even dystopian future opens up when one considers that corporations can also wield this power. This lets private networks and companies shape our society's knowledge, production, and power. So, it's later. Let's take that pen out. Prior to writing this script, I put a poll up on my Instagram story, and I think now's the time to share the results. So, let's dive into that. Before, I said understanding the basics of copyright law wasn't all too common, so here are the numbers. 92% of participants polled say that they had either very limited or no knowledge whatsoever on copyright law. Only 67% of participants polled stated that they knew what the DMCA was. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being completely clueless and 10 being a barred lawyer, 92% of participants rated their knowledge of copyright law at a 4 or below. I can't be the only one who finds this a little more than ridiculous. It's laughable, honestly. According to the survey, 33% of participants haven't even heard of the DMCA. I think it's criminal that people who actively use the internet on a day-to-day basis have no idea what's going on around them. But again, it's not like I can blame them. Copyright law is complex to the point that even legal experts have problems interpreting it. That's part of the reason why I'm making this a publicly accessible video using conversational language. All of the reading I've had to do just to get to the point where I can comfortably make this is entirely too much. You shouldn't have to dedicate all of your free time to reading complex legal documents or be a bar lawyer to understand occurrences happening around you on a day-to-day basis, especially when said occurrences have such a dramatic effect. We've been doing a lot of talking about the DMCA, but that's a piece of legislation that's only valid in the United States. Websites hosted outside of the United States don't have to abide by DMCA takedown notices. Other parts of the world have different methods of copyright protection online. In the European Union, copyright law differs greatly from what we see in the United States. For example, what is considered fair use of an intellectual property is much less broad than it is here. The laws on copyright aren't standard among the nations in the EU. It's kind of like state legislation in the US. Some countries allow for a more interpretive look at fair use. A good example of this would be the UK's practice of fair dealing, where a judge looks at cases specifically to see what is and what isn't fair use. This isn't what we see across the board, though. According to Tricia Meyer, in The Politics of Online Copyright Enforcement in the EU, most rights holders were in favor of stricter copyright laws in the EU. Those against restrictive copyright laws in the EU include legal professionals, museums, public intellectuals, universities, and libraries. Even some political organizations in the EU are opposed to the restrictive laws currently in play. This speaks to both Meyer's and Halpert's notion of the control of information via online copyright enforcement. As Meyer puts it, there is little room for reflection on the value of widespread access to knowledge and privacy within an approach that advocates for strong property rights and tampering with the architecture of the internet. Online copyright enforcement policies are part of the dialectic between domination and resistance in our capitalist market system. They are key battlegrounds in setting rules for commercial and alternative production, distribution, and consumption of media. Policymakers from across Europe seem incapable of coming up with a solution for online copyright enforcement. Many government organizations focused on intellectual property protection seem to putter around the middle ground between two ideological opposites. The analysis of the current situation in the EU will hopefully bring about change in the near future for online copyright enforcement, but as of now, there's nothing on the horizon. This is especially true since there are more important matters globally that need attending to. Elected officials remain locked in a stalemate, and the state of intellectual property law continues to deteriorate. I wanted to look for other international perspectives when writing for this project. Author Anirba Mazumdar writes about the tension between the United States Digital Millennium Copyright Act and policies like the Information Society Directive in the European Union in copyright law and the digital world. In it, he posits the idea that copyright is the true engine of expression, as it provides a lucrative incentive for those who wish to create content and distribute it. This sits in direct opposition with Meyer's idea that there are inherent faults in policy created specifically for financial gain in a capitalist society. However, throughout his writing, Mazumdar and his colleagues say that there needs to be a balance struck between copyright holders and the public. This balance can only be struck through cooperation. Everyone comes to the same conclusion. Media conglomerates, large corporations, and random individuals shouldn't be in control of the knowledge the public has access to. What I haven't seen is a well thought out solution to this problem. Some say that diversity in copyright ownership will solve the issue. And while I agree that this could be beneficial to some of our issues, I don't think this will bring about the national and global change that we really need to see. I'll be honest, when I was looking internationally to see what other nations were doing about copyright law online, I was hoping to find a solution. It turns out there isn't any. From what I've been able to see, the United States is head and shoulders above most other nations when it comes to copyright law. If you haven't caught on by now, that's horrible. It's crazy to believe that the DMCA is the best the world has to offer. This is the part where I should be presenting you with some sort of course of action or resolution, but candidly, I don't have one. There's no simple way to fix what seems to be a global issue. All that being said, I do think that there are some things we can do in order to make this a little less unbearable. For one, a good move in the United States at least would be leveling the playing field in court. It's no secret that the wealthier you are, the longer you can drag out a court case, especially if it's civil rather than criminal. Making it harder for both individuals and corporations to abuse their wealth and status in the courtroom can really help end the weaponization of copyright law. Another less immediate fix could be, as previously stated, more diversity in copyright ownership. I know I dissed it before, but making it harder for one specific group to own all the media, like UMG, can really help again with ending the weaponization of copyright law. These are all minor solutions though. What we really need is an updated version of the DMCA. It seems like a no-brainer. We need a system that, instead of being tailored to our current situation like the DMCA was, we can make more flexible and elastic to accommodate for our rapid technological advancements. That's all I have for now. I'll put a QR code somewhere with all the sources I used for this. I hope you had a fun time. I know I did. Thanks for watching. Just a quick shout out to my parents, my professor, Dr. Bomarito, and all my friends, all of whom deserve medals for listening to me gush about copyright law for the last few months now.